Alrighty, so I got the Wii out. As you guys saw recently, I picked up this Wii2HDMI adapter for like $15 Canadian. Actually, you can get these even cheaper online. You can get these as cheap as like $8. Now, I don't know how much shipping's going to be if you get it on Amazon Prime. I think it's about 11. But, you know, say $10 to $15. These are very, very cheap. Canadian, I should say. $10 to $15 Canadian. They're incredibly cheap. You know, obviously economies of scale comes into play here because the Wii was so popular and so many people were surprised that the Wii didn't have an HDMI port. So obviously they made a lot of these, and so that's a big factor there. Okay, so I get a lot of customers that come into my work, and they're looking for the the cheap $20 composite to HDMI scaler, and it's a lot of times it's because they want to play their Wii on their new TV. And I've always wondered how this would compare. Like, this is cheaper, but I never knew if these took like, obviously this plugs into the multi AV out port on the back of the Wii, and in theory it could be using composite, it could be using S-Video, could be using component, YPBPR, or RGB. If it's only using composite or S-Video inside, then it's only using 480i. It can't do the progressive 480p. So I've always wondered, is this taking composite or S-Video, 480i, and then deinterlacing it? And in which case, how much better is it going to look than one of those cheap $20 scalers? Or is this actually taking component or YPBPR or RGB component 480p and converting that to digital? Yeah, always curious how this is going to look, so let's find out. As far as installing this thing goes, yeah, it's really this easy. You plug your HDMI into this guy, and then you plug this guy into the back of the Wii. Done. It's that easy. This thing doesn't need its own power. It gets all the power that it needs from the Wii. And you may notice on the back of here there's an HDMI and an audio, but the audio is completely optional. It's if you wanted to send the audio out separately to maybe just a small pair of powered computer speakers or something like that. For comparison, I thought we would compare it to using the stock composite AV cables. We'll be going through a RetroTink. That's just because my TV doesn't have composite. Most modern TVs don't have composite. They don't have S-Video. They don't even have component anymore. A lot of modern TVs only have HDMI. And so keeping that in mind, this is just a really simple way to get HDMI out of your Wii to your modern TV. The fact it's going to do a good job, well, spoiler alert, the fact it does a good job at it for $15 is pretty amazing. It's not just a good solution because it's cheap. It's a good solution, period. So with this plugged in to the back of the Wii, we can go right into my capture device that records at 1080p 60. Now we're comparing 480p component basically to 480i composite. So it's not a fair comparison. It's kind of relevant in a way because for a lot of people, composite's just going to be what they have. If you've got a Wii, you've got the composite cables, and this is your upgrade path. $15, and it's going to make a huge difference. So like I already said, spoiler alert. There's going to be a huge difference here. Going from 480i composite to 480p component or RGB, there's going to be a huge difference. The fact this is achievable for $15 or less really is amazing. This is a great, like I said, this is a great solution because it gives you a great image quality, period. This thing's plug and play. It's simple to use. It doesn't need power. Plug it into the back of the Wii. Boom, you got an HDMI port. It gives you excellent image quality. I'm not going to say excellent image quality. I'm going to roll back a little bit there. It gives you good image quality. Gives you good audio. And the fact it happens to do that for dirt cheap is just a bonus. There's a little bit of noise, angled lines sort of that can run through the image sometimes. It's not always noticeable. I don't know if it's that because it comes and goes, or if it's because it's only noticeable on certain colors. If you've got a lot of a certain color, a solid color on the screen. I noticed it while playing Mario Kart on the beach level, or the sandy beach. I noticed it there. And there's a little bit of like a sharpening artifact, I think. Now, that could be my TV, because again, it's still upscaling from 1080p to 480 to 4K. But it seems like there's maybe like a little bit of sharpening, over sharpening, if you will, and a little bit of noise. But it looks better than I expected it. My initial impressions when I first hooked this thing up, turned on my TV, were good. Very good, in fact. I think this probably looks as good, or at least close to as good, as straight component cables would. But keep in mind, like I said, most new TVs don't have component inputs. So you would need like an external scaler that can handle component, YPBPR or RGB, SCART, whatever. A lot of people have like the RetroTink 5X Pro, I think it's called, or like an OSSC, and those are going to cost like hundreds of dollars. This only cost $15, and you'd be hard pressed just to find a cheap set of Wii component cables for that much. Again, considering most TVs now only have HDMI, this is an amazing solution that just so happens to be cheap. I'd also like to point out that even if your TV has component, like how well your TV handles the analog to digital conversion and upscaling of the component inputs is going to vary from model to model. And I actually wonder if this chip that's in here is one that was used perhaps in a lot of cheap TVs, maybe Chinese TVs, the TCL brands, or even others, during that like 1080p era when TV still had component, and they would have needed to, again, convert it from analog to digital and upscale it to 1080p. Like I said earlier, this chip is so cheap, it must have been just mass produced in huge numbers. So it would make sense if this was a common chip, it was maybe used in a lot of TVs or monitors or something like that. And it's just a chip that there was literally millions of made, and that's how it can be so cheap. If this was a chip that was just made for this product, you couldn't make your own chip and sell it in a product this cheap. So it must have been a common chip, possibly used in TVs. Again, I would say if your TV has component inputs, just go get component cables. Worst case, it's going to look just the same as this. Best case, it might actually look a little bit better. But if your TV's got component inputs, just go pick up a set of component cables. I guess also the quality of the cables could affect the image quality. Again, worst case, probably going to look about the same as this, but you know, if you've got a good TV and it's got a good scaler and you buy a good set of component cables, it could look a little bit better than this. But again, most modern TVs only have HDMI, so I keep banging on about the price of this, and obviously I would say the price is almost not a factor. If this thing sold for like $40 or $50, I honestly would still be giving it a good review. I mean, think about it. Hyperkin sells those like Genesis or TurboGrafx-16, Sega Saturn. They sell one that does the SNES to HDMI. They charge like $60 Canadian for those. This is $15, and it's doing a better job. I had one of those Hyperkin, the Super Nintendo N64 GameCube multi-AV to HDMI adapters. I actually did a review on it, and it didn't get a good review. Any of the small complaints that I have with this, the little bit of noise, a little bit of sometimes the lines you can see, the little bit of like over sharpening artifacts, I can say all that about the Hyperkin multiplied by 3. The Hyperkin had worse noise. Those angled lines running through the image, you can almost always see it. On this, I can sometimes see it, but most of the time I can't. There was also that weird temporal smoothing. It would have to catch up when something moved on screen. I showed that up close. And not to mention the fact there was deinterlacing artifacts at all. That thing was supposed to be handling 240p and converting it to 1080p, I think, or if it's 720p or 480p. Regardless, it shouldn't have to de-interlace. It was already progressive. It was never interlaced. You shouldn't have to de-interlace 240p coming off of a Super Nintendo. The Hyperkin also butchered the audio on top of that. It was distorted. It was too quiet. You really had to turn up your amplifier. This one handles the audio just fine. I mean, if the gain's too high, it's going to be distorted. I would say it's a little bit higher maybe than it would normally be, but it's definitely very, very serviceable. Like I said, the image and the audio is pretty good. And it's doing that at $15, whereas the Hyperkin was $60. But still, like I said earlier in this video, I've had many customers coming in looking for those cheap composite AV to HDMI scalers. For this very reason, they're like, oh, I found my Wii in a box and I wanted to hook it up to my new TV, and the new TV only has HDMI ports. I've always assumed this was a better solution because, again, it's situation specific. Like, this was meant to do one thing and only one thing, and I assumed it was better, but I was always just assuming. Now I know that it's better. Like, hands down, no question about it. This is way better than those cheap composite scalers. First of all, they're only going to be handling 480i. I shown one running an NES running Super Mario Brothers, and there was screen tearing. So this is definitely way better than those cheap composite scalers, and probably cheaper. The only other thing I can't really test or speculate on would be lag. Perhaps this, is adding a noticeable amount of input lag, and something like the RetroTink 5X Pro or the OSSC would probably have a lot less lag. And my TV, because again, the TV still got to upscale this 1080p to 4K, and yeah, so the TV could be adding some lag too, but likely this is adding some amount of input lag. I just don't know. All said and done, though, like I said, this thing impressed me. My initial impressions were good. It looks better than I thought it was going to look. And for $15, you cannot go wrong. If you're just running the stock composite AV cables that the Wii comes with, this is a huge upgrade for you for $15. And there's no screen tearing. The audio is handled well. It's pretty impressive. I was definitely impressed with it. My initial impression was good. Like I said, I've used $60 Hyperkin scalers that were worse than this. So that is saying something, I think. Is this the best image quality you can get? No. Again, if your TV has component cables or component inputs, you should probably just get a component cable. It's going to look as good, if not a little bit better. And obviously, if you've already invested hundreds of dollars into a RetroTink 5X Pro or an OSSC, this isn't for you either. But for everyone else who's just running the stock composite cables, or maybe you've got S-video cables, maybe like me, you had component cables for your Wii, but you just got a new TV and now you can't use them. For everyone else, this is an amazing solution that just so happens to be cheap. And I keep saying that. It's not a good solution because it is cheap. Again, if this thing was $40 or $50, it was still doing a better job than those $60 Hyperkin products. So, Again, it's a good product. It just so happens to be cheap. Anyways, guys, that is it. See you later.